Hello and welcome to Live Fit, Ignite Change, where together, as a community, we inspire each other to live a fit life, ignite the change we wish to see, and thrive in all areas of life.
Know someone who lacks the energy they used to have, feels tired, struggles with mood or mental clarity, or keeping a healthy weight, maintaining muscle, or sleeping well? Today's episode is for them, as it's all about thriving in life. It's with Gary Brecka of 10xHealth, who has spent over 20 years helping people live with peak performance. In this conversation, we cover it's not aging that causes these issues, but a depletion of raw materials. And we cover how that's easy to fix. Also, how the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease, and what you can do to prevent disease, and why vitamin D3 is the most important nutrient in the human body, and how to make sure you're getting enough. And when you follow these steps, phenomenal things happen. As Gary says,
phenomenal things happen. Brain fog goes away. Mood disorders and conditions eviscerate. Sleep deepens. Response to exercise skyrockets. Waking energy soars. All of the things that we accept as a consequence of youth, and we also accept as an erosion of aging, are not, in fact, a consequence of aging at all.
So get ready for a truly amazing episode so you can create the change you wish to see.
Changing our world does not happen at once. It does not happen alone. It takes a committed group to be the change we wish to see. So together, we rise above negative influences to lead by example, making a positive impact at home and around the world. You can learn more, join us, and get show notes at livefitignitechange.com, or for short, livefic.com.
All right, here we go. I originally recorded this with Gary as a guest host on the Impact with Don Winter podcast, so you can hear the full conversation there. Gary's points were so good and so aligned with what this Live Fit Ignite Change podcast is all about, I had to include an episode here with snippets and commentary on what he shared as well. Also, Gary will be speaking at our upcoming DOP Capital Health and Wellbeing Summit in Puerto Rico. I'll have a small part there alongside some of the top health, fitness, and longevity minds in the world, including Dr. Harari, who wrote Life Force with Tony Robbins, Nick Butner from Blue Zones, who is on the next episode of this podcast, Mark Sisson from Mark's Daily Apple and Primal Kitchen, who was on episode 9, Amanda Holmes, CEO of Chet Holmes International, who was on episode 4, and many more. So we'll link to that event and all the resources mentioned in this episode at livefitignitechange.com/Gary. And now, let's jump into the conversation. Awesome. Well, hello, Gary, and wonderful to see you. I'm super excited for this conversation. Personally, love all the stuff that you're doing, and really looking forward to seeing you, too, at our Health and Wellbeing and Longevity Summit in Puerto Rico in November.
Yeah, I'm excited about that, too, man. I really am.
I think we are in for a treat because I guess when you were first introduced to DOP and met Don and Bo was at the EXP event in Dallas.
That's right.
From what I was told there were some amazing speakers, including Tony Robbins, and you were actually voted the number one best speaker in the show.
Oh, that makes me so happy, man. That's really kind of you. You know, it's not me, it's the message, it's really resonating.
It is. I love your message. And I think people already know you, but for any of the listeners that don't, I'll give a quick bio and then we'll dive right in. So first off, Gary is the co-founder and chief biologist of 10xHealth, has over 20 years experience in biohacking and functional medicine, sits on the board of the NFL Alumni Association as health service director, and his passion lies in customizing peak performance protocols for individuals to achieve optimal health. Wow. I love that. That is so aligned with what I want.
So
you fill in a little bit more? Yeah, fill in a little bit more and just share what you're up to these days.
So, as you mentioned, I'm now in the wellness space, but I wasn't always in the wellness space. For the better part of 20 years, I was a mortality expert for the insurance industry. People seem to be so fascinated with that. And so if we got 5 years of medical records on you and 5 years of demographic data, myself and my team could tell the insurance company, how long you had to live to the month. And, it was a very unrewarding career because we were not allowed to have any contact with the patient, not allowed to have any contact with the treating physician. Even if we saw life-threatening drug interactions, we couldn't have any contact with those persons. We could only access the records and the data and the medical information. But what we realized were a number of things. I say this every time I speak, every time I'm on a podcast, every moment that I get. We realized, over this 20-year period that number one, the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease, and I'm happy to elaborate on that. Nearly every disease state, pathological state known to mankind, and not just disease states like Alzheimer's and diabetes and hypertension, but conditions where we accept an erosion of our baseline sense of normalcy, just things like brain fog, poor sleep, water retention, weight gain, poor mental clarity, lack of short-term recall, ADD, ADHD, OCD. These conditions all have a major component in the absence of oxygen. And the second thing we realized was that the majority of what human beings were suffering with were a lack of raw material. It wasn't a disease that was happening to us. It was a condition that was happening within us. Our physiology really determines our trajectory in our life. Your physiology will drag you back down into the state in which it most comfortably exists. Right. And there are people that have struggle with mood or emotional state. There are people that struggle with weight gain and water retention. There are people that struggle with getting a good night's sleep, getting adequate delta wave sleep. There's people that wake up every day and suffer from brain fog, and they just accept it as a consequence of aging. And none of that has to be accepted by human beings. We were really put here to thrive. And we've gotten so far away from the study of human beings, from mankind, basic human physiology, that when we actually go back into the human body and we look for missing raw materials, things as simple as vitamins, nutrients, amino acids, minerals, when you replace these contents, phenomenal things happen. Phenomenal things happen. Brain fog goes away. Mood disorders and conditions eviscerate. Sleep deepens. Response to exercise skyrockets. Waking energy soars. All of the things that we accept as a consequence of youth, and we also accept as an erosion of aging, are not, in fact, a consequence of aging at all. They're a consequence of a continued depletion of raw materials. And it's very easy for us to find out and ask the right questions to our body, not to our friends or our spouse or even our doctor, but to ask the right questions to our body about what is missing in my body that's keeping me from a state of absolute optimal health. And my life's mission now is not to predict how soon people will die, but to help people live longer, healthier, happier lives. In fact, one of the consequences of doing so much mortality research was we also realized that the greatest impacts on lifespan and health span, how many healthy years you have and how many years you have left on this planet, they're both what we called modifiable risk factors, meaning these are things that are relatively easy to change in your life, that when those changes are made, they have demonstrative impacts on how many years you have left on this earth and how many healthy years you have left on this earth. And that's really the message that I want to get out to the world, is that, human beings were meant to thrive. And if we would just ask the right questions of our bodies, it will give us the right answer. And we can put simple raw materials back into the human body and achieve a state of optimal health that most of us thought was well beyond our grasp, because we're either too old or too busy or too stressed, or don't have the right information to really reach that state.
Wow, that is awesome. And I love that. You're put here to thrive. I think that is so important to what people don't do enough of. And I'd love for you to dive in. You mentioned you could dive in a little bit more. And I know I've heard you talk in other times about people talking about, oh yeah, blood pressure, high blood pressure, it runs in my family, it just passes down. And the whole idea of, well, no, that's not really on a gene. I'd love you to share a little bit about that as well, and the whole process to thriving in life.
Right. There is truth to the fact that medical conditions you can have a predisposition to a medical condition because of your genetics. That's very true. But the majority of what happens when we see that a condition runs in families, like hypertension runs in families. My great-grandfather had it, my grandfather had it, my father has it, and now I have it. So we accept that the disease hypertension is being passed from generation to generation, or the disease of hypothyroid is being passed from generation to generation, or even things like attention deficit disorder or depression or anxiety or propensity for addiction. But what we overlook is that very often these are not actually diseases that are being passed from generation to generation. They are genetic defects that essentially do not allow the human body to convert a raw material into its usable form. And let me explain what I mean. So I always use the example that, we pull crude oil out of the ground, but you can't put crude oil into your gas tank. because, the car doesn't understand that fuel source. Crude oil has to be refined into gasoline, and now the car understands that fuel source. Well, human beings are no different, right? We put all kinds of raw materials, and there's not a single one known to mankind, no protein, no mineral, no amino acid, no nutrient, carbohydrate, vitamin, and nothing that we put into the human body that's used in the format that we put it in. Everything that enters our body is converted into its usable form through a process called methylation. Refining crude oil is called refining, but converting raw materials in the human body is called methylation. And this is arguably the most important process that every human being listening to this recording goes through. So, for example, if you put folic acid into the human body, which, by the way, is an entirely man-made chemical. Folic acid doesn't occur anywhere naturally on the surface of the earth. You cannot find folic acid in nature. But when we put folic acid into the human body, it gets converted into its usable form called methylfolate. And methylfolate floods the body as a methyl group. It goes all throughout the body, and it helps convert neurotransmitters, amino acids into neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters become our mood, our emotional state. It helps us to move contents through our gut. It helps us degrade thought and keep our mind clear and focused so we don't have too many windows open at the same time. It helps to regulate hormones in the human body and stop water retention from things like excess estrogen. So something as simple as a vitamin that enters the body that gets converted into a usable form, then floods the rest of the body. It enters cells and has a really important role in human function. And if you can't make this conversion, then you have a deficiency. And it is the deficiency that leads to a lot of these conditions.
Right. It's these deficiencies. So your body may have an issue converting a nutrient, and then that impacts mood, depression, or anxiety, or emotional state. It could be blocking the feeling of elation. So people often look externally to try to figure out why they don't feel right. Or for skin issues, again, they may look externally and add a topical cream or something like that. But the need is to look at the inside, at the root cause.
When I was in grad school, again, in my second human biology degree, I had to take a lot of plant botany courses and like arbor courses, and I didn't really like them. I don't have anything wrong with plants, but I wanted to study the human body and not plants. But one thing that stood out to me was that without failure, a botanist or an arborist, someone who is an expert in plant biology, anytime that there is a disease or an issue in the leaves or the branches or the trunk, they always look at the soil. Right? They always test the soil. So they say, look at all of this decay that's on these leaves at the top of this tree. And they'll do a core sample of the soil and say, oh, it's deficient in nitrogen. We add nitrogen to the soil and it fixes the leaves. But we don't think about human beings this way. Right? We start spraying the leaf with poison, or we start cutting the leaves or the branches, or we shave the trunk because we think that this is something that's happening to this plant when it's actually something that's happening within us. And this is very true with human beings. I can go raw material by raw material and tell you exactly what happens if you start to deplete certain raw materials, like vitamin D3, for example, one of the leading causes of mortality in COVID. In fact, the second leading cause of morbidity in COVID was a clinical deficiency in the most important nutrient in the human body, vitamin D3, the only vitamin that human beings can make on our own. And vitamin D3 is very easy to supplement with. You don't even have to buy my vitamin D3. There are plenty of great vitamin D3 manufacturers out there. They compound it with K2 so that D3 is effective at transporting calcium. But simple things like these depleted raw materials have demonstrative effects on our lifestyle and how well we can fight off a pathogen or a bacteria or a virus. And so when you talk about things as critical as weakening of the immune system, and we start taking, anti-inflammatories and antihistamines and cold medications, and we try to avoid, high pollen environments, or we mask and quarantine and social distance to try to keep ourselves away from viral pathogens instead of actually strengthening the immune system, the God-given immune system that was actually meant to fight for us. And so most of your listeners right now would be surprised probably to know that there are some simple raw materials that they could put back into their body and reach a state of optimal health that they probably thought was eluding them. I think most people have accepted such an erosion of their baseline sense of normalcy. They're walking around at 55 or 60%. And when they just go back to feeling normal, they think they feel amazing. I say it to people all the time. You actually don't feel amazing. You feel normal. That's how you're supposed to feel.
People have lost that sense of normal. And then once you do, you're back to normal, but you feel like you're thriving. And it really lets you impact so much more in all aspects of life. I think when you were talking before, it reminded me of really at TLP, we talk about the 4 crises we look to impact, where one is the happiness crisis. People have more opportunity right now to be happy, but studies show they just are not. And I think a lot of it falls into line with they just don't feel as good as they could when they are living back to the normal and looking, like you say, look at the soil, look at the root cause. So I'd love you to share more like what 10xHealth and what you guys are doing to be able to get people back to that feeling of normal.
Sure. I mean, this happiness crisis is it's really a pandemic, right? So when people can't achieve an optimal state of mood and emotion. So for example, if I just affected the conversion of one amino acid, tryptophan, into one neurotransmitter, serotonin, now what happens is the peaks of mood start to escape me. Passion, elation, joy, arousal, libido. And when you're walking around long enough, unable to achieve these emotional states, you start looking to your outside environment for what is the negative impact on me that's causing me to feel like this, and you attach to that. So you actually search for the negative input that's causing you to have the negative feeling. And so once you find that negative input, you focus on it, you attach to it, and now you become either part of a cause that has a very negative connotation, or you develop a very negative mood towards other people or other cultures or even other opinions. And it's because it gives you comfort to know that there's a reason that you can't reach this emotional state. And it's not your fault. It's the fault of somebody insulting you or somebody offending you or somebody doing something that bothers you. And this is why you're in this suppressed emotional state. When the truth is, it could be as simple as a lack of raw materials, simple as raw materials.
Right. It's these raw materials. And often you'll hear people say that it's diet alone. And don't get me wrong, proper nutrition, eating whole foods filled with nutrients and removing junk, sugar, gluten, and processed foods is vitally important. An incredibly important, simple change you can make to live with vitality. Yet there's more to it.
I get on a lot of these podcasts and I talk to a lot of, nutritional experts and you can get everything that you need from your diet. If you're eating the right, leafy greens and fruits and grass-fed meats, and that's partially true. But our food supply is so depleted in nutrients. The last time we did a soil lineage study in the United States was 1941. So if you pick up a bag of spinach in the supermarket, what's updated are the macros, the carbohydrates, the fats, the proteins, the amount of sugar. But the nutrient content, how much calcium is in that spinach, how much iron is in that spinach, how much magnesium is in that spinach, that's borrowed from a 1941 soil lineage study, before the majority of all pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, and preservatives were developed. Right. And so now we preserve fruits and vegetables, for example. When preservatives were first discovered, they were actually called anti-digestives, because the process that keeps an apple, if you slice it, from turning brown, benzoquinone, that process is called oxidation. Right? So if you prevent oxidation, the process of digestion is oxidation. So if you prevent oxidation, you prevent digestion. And then some smart marketers said, hey, we shouldn't call this anti-digestives. Nobody's going to eat an anti-digestive apple or eat anti-digestive lettuce. So let's call it a preservative. Sounds a lot better. We spray our entire grain supply with a chemical made in a laboratory called folic acid. And instead of saying that our grains and rice and pastas and all white flour is sprayed with folic acid, we say it's fortified or enriched. Right? So if you spin around a box of cereal, it'll say fortified whole grains, enriched bleached white flour. This is just a code word for sprayed with folic acid. Well, 44% of the population can't process folic acid. So it causes all kinds of conditions when you put chemical raw materials instead of actual raw materials into the human body and expect to have the same result.
Exactly. Causes those issues, and not to mention all the Roundup and glyphosate and all the other stuff that goes into that as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So supplementation is important. The point is that it's targeted supplementation, not just supplementing for the sake of supplementing, but supplementing for a deficiency in the human body. And then watch what magnificent things happen when you give the body the raw material it needs. Just like when that botanist added nitrogen to the soil, it fixed the leaf.
That's awesome. And that's what your test brings out, essentially. That
So our at 10xHealth, and I'll just say that we're not the only ones that do this test, because everybody gets on me for saying, you're just out here to push your test. I'm actually not out here to push my test. I want every human being to do one test, one time in their life. And it's a genetic test. It's a cheek swab. You take a Q-tip and you put it in your mouth and you swab your cheek. You stick it in you stick it in a test tube. You send it to a lab. They pull 5 actionable genes. They don't look at your heritage or whether or not you have detached earlobes or olive skin or green eyes. They look at 5 actionable genes. What can my body convert and what can it not convert into the usable form? And once you have that information, for the balance of your lifetime, you will never guess on what your body needs in order to function optimally. Right? So if you can't convert folic acid into methylfolate, you supplement with methylfolate. If you're taking a cyanide-based form of B12 called cyanocobalamin, you switch that to something called methylcobalamin, readily available raw materials. And depending on which of these 5 genes is broken and where that gene is broken, you supplement for that deficiency and you fix that raw material. So now the body has the fuel that it needs to function optimally.
So you're fueled properly. And that's awesome. And that's what it tests for. So you can then go forward to really perform in all aspects.
And that's what it tests for. I mean, if you go to 10xhealthtest.com, which is the number 10, the letter X, healthtest.com, right there, you can, buy the gene test. It's $599. They'll ship the gene test to your door. You'll cheek swab yourself in your home. You'll send it back to the lab, and then when the report comes back, you'll see that these are the materials that your body can convert. This is what you can't convert. This is what your body is deficient in, and exactly what targeted supplementation that you need.
That is awesome. We'll link to that in the show notes too, so you guys have it. But yeah, that's awesome. And I would ask, it doesn't change over time either. Like once you've taken it once, you get these supplements, you're good to go.
Yes, because remember, this is your genes. Mm-hmm. So we can't fix the gene, but we can supplement for its function. Right? So the genes you're born with are the genes you die with. Now, there is some gene altering technology and CRISPR out there, but those are scary things. But for the most part, we cannot actually fix genes in the human body. If a gene is broken in one cell, it is broken in all 32 trillion cells in the human body. Remember that our genes are the master of activity in the body. It's the master puppeteer. It gives instructions to the body or raw materials to the body so that it can function. DNA, which is like the CEO of the human body, not only is responsible for replicating itself, right? Making a perfect clone of itself. That's called replication. But it's also responsible for a process called transcription, which is it gives instructions to the cell. There's 32 trillion of these cells that are taking orders from your DNA every single day on how do I eliminate waste? How do I repair? How do I detoxify? How do I regenerate? If those instructions have pages missing, then that process is impaired. I mean, all cancer is DNA replication run amok.
Wow.
Right? All cancer begins in a hypoxic environment, oxygen-deprived environment in the body, and all cancer is DNA replication run amok. Why would we not search for the raw material that helps our DNA to replicate and DNA to communicate?
You absolutely should. And I think that's what part of this, I love that you're doing this and sharing the education too. Again, it makes me think of what we do at DLP. I mentioned before about how we like to live fully in all aspects of lives, and we call it the 8 Fs. That's faith, family, friends, fitness, like we're talking about here, finances, fulfillment, freedom, and fun. And so we started a program called the Fit Life Challenge, where we've rolled out to, I actually started my CrossFit gym years ago, but brought it to DLP. Yeah. We've rolled it out here, taking it to other organizations. And it's that whole idea where it's not just focused on one aspect of life. You want to improve your sleep, your mindset, your nutrition, your exercise, and just start educating people about where to go to get back to that level where they can really have vitality and live fully. And so I'd love for you to share too. I mean, I've heard some amazing stories about what you've simply done with breath work and the reduction of stress, and especially as it relates to that, because a lot of our listeners are those high performers at these high growth organizations, and how important it really is to just take that time for yourself and so you can perform better in the midst of what may be a crazy work day.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, I have a favorite saying. I say all the time that aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. Aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. We have got to stop telling grandma not to go outside, it's too hot, not to go outside, it's too cold, to just lay down, to just rest, just relax, to eat at the very first pang of hunger, right? If we understood that stress is actually very good for the human body, if you don't load a bone, it will not strengthen. If you don't actually tear a muscle, it won't grow. If you don't challenge the immune system, it will weaken. I'll just leave that at that. But if you don't challenge the immune system, it will weaken. So by actually challenging the body, we strengthen the body. By stressing the body, we strengthen the body. And physical stress improves our resilience to mental stress. That is a biophysiologic fact, by the way. So your morning routine not only determines the trajectory of your day, it determines the trajectory of the rest of your life. And I'm not the only one that preaches this, and nor am I the only one that knows this. But if every day of your life, when you woke up in the morning, you breathed, you applied a physical stress and a thermal stress, you would begin to back up your biological age, significantly trailing your chronological age. So, when I say that the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease, nothing could be more truthful than that statement. Nothing is more impactful than that statement in terms of how many years you have left on Earth, how many healthy years you have left on Earth. If you look at people that are exhausted, they actually sleep the worst. Doesn't really make sense because you think, well, why are people that are the most exhausted sleeping the worst? Well, because exhaustion comes from lack of blood oxygen, and poor sleep comes from lack of blood oxygen. I mean, you take somebody whose blood does not carry oxygen very well, and you start to lower their respiratory rate, like what happens when they go into a deep sleep. And as their respiratory rate gets lower, their oxygen level in their blood starts to drop. When the brain sees oxygen getting to critical levels, it will pulse cortisol and wake you up. So people that are exhausted because they're not carrying oxygen well look like a bouncing rubber ball going down the hallway. They actually sleep and wake up more exhausted than when they went to bed.
Wow,
and then
I
the
love
worst
these analogies.
they go and take sleep medication, right? Because sleep medication, if you actually look at the majority of sleep medication, it will actually say mechanism of action unknown. And so the way that they work is they blindfold the brain's view of blood oxygen. So I hear people say all the time, man, I really don't like taking Tylenol PM or zolpidem nitrate or diazepam because it's still in my system the next day. I wake up groggy. That's actually not true. That medication's been out of your system for hours. What's happened is you blindfolded the brain's ability to see blood oxygen, and now your brain can't wake you up. So it can't save your life. And so you're feeling the effects of having suffocated for 6 hours. And so if we understand that oxygen is linked to energy and oxygen is linked to deep sleep, then we understand the importance of things like breath work, right? And breath work is free. I like to give people a lot of advice that they don't have to buy a fancy piece of equipment. I mean, we have a superhuman protocol that's about $140,000. If you can afford that, you should put it in your home. But the majority of your listeners are like, what can I do in my hotel room, in my condo, in my house, on vacation to have the most demonstrative impact on optimal health? And they're all free. The first piece of advice I give every human being I come in contact with is learn how to breathe. If you just took 8 minutes, and did 3 rounds of 30 obnoxiously deep breaths in the morning with a breath hold in between, on average, it would add 7 years to your health span. 7 years to your health span by spending 8 minutes in the morning breathing. And so when we start to think about the massive impact of something that simple, then that should be a must do no matter what you're doing. If you ever, sometimes, when I'm traveling, I'll do 5 or 6 cities in 5 or 6 days, and I'll always document it and say, guys, this is how I'm doing 6 cities in 5 days, and I'm more energized when I land from the 6th city than I was when I left on day one. And that is that I never miss a breathwork session. I do these 3 rounds of 30 breaths. Sometimes I do it much longer with a breath hold in between. I never, ever miss the opportunity to take a cold shower or a cold plunge.
Right.
Cold plunges are $5,000 or $6,000. Cold showers are free. Right. If you live in the Midwest, or like the Northeast or the northern states, your cold showers really work well. I mean, Florida They only get into the 70s.
They're not quite as cold, but what you're saying, it's so right on. And I will tell you personally, gosh, it was, we did a trip around the world. It was probably 6 or so years ago now, but that's when I fully committed to the morning routine that you're talking about. And I absolutely can say that it is beyond a shadow of doubt the thing that has made the biggest effect on my life, and being able to just have that breath work and do that kind of stuff. And at the risk of turning some of our DLP events into looking like Tony Robbins events, we've started off with some of that priming style breathing that we do, but it's been pretty amazing to see the outcome. And I think just with you through that and seeing the transformations, I've heard some pretty amazing stories of transformations, what you guys have done when somebody comes to you. Maybe you have a typical example of when someone comes who's not feeling well, and then after y'all work with them, how you can really turn their life about. I'd love to hear kind of the before and after.
So this goes back to raw material, right? So let's say, for example, the largest reason, the biggest single reason that people come to us is because they say, I just don't have the same energy level I had even a few years ago. I'm either exhausted or I'm just low on energy. I have afternoon crashes. I don't have the waking energy that I had a few years ago. And so when someone tells you that they lack energy, when you convert that to physiology, really what they're saying is, if I don't have the same energy that I used to have, really what they're saying is I don't have the same oxygen level I used to have. Because if we understand that oxygen equals energy, which it does, now if that's the leaf of the tree, I'll trace it right back into the root for you and show you exactly what I mean. So when someone says I lack energy, they really mean I lack oxygen. So when you look into their blood or into their genetics, you'll find that in almost every case, they're low on what's called red blood cells and low on something called hemoglobin. Right? A red blood cell is like a tennis ball, and it has a fluid inside of it called hemoglobin, and it's inside that fluid that oxygen is bound. If I start depleting tennis balls from the bloodstream, and then when I'm done depleting tennis balls, I start draining fluid out of them, you can see that if it's that fluid that holds oxygen, that it's very important. It's vital to the amount of oxygen our blood can transfer and hold. So if you're exhausted and you're low on red blood cell, you're low on hemoglobin, not even anemic, still in the normal ranges for these indicators, then the question is, how do I raise it? Well, you go to the factory that makes red blood cells and hemoglobin. It's called the bone marrow. And once I get to the bone marrow, how do I get the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells and hemoglobin? You balance the hormone testosterone. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you take testosterone. I'm going to trace it further into the roots. But in men and women, the primary role of the hormone testosterone is actually not male characteristics. It's not deep voice or facial hair or aggression or muscles. The primary role of that hormone is to put pressure on the bone marrow to increase its production of red blood cells. It's called erythropoiesis. So if you are hormone deficient, you're deficient in the boss that tells the bone marrow to produce red blood cells that carry oxygen. So now, if I continue going down into the soil, if I'm deficient in testosterone, well, what's testosterone made from? Well, largely it's made from a compound called DHEA. DHEA is in the bloodstream of every single person listening to this podcast. As you get clinically deficient in this nutrient, your hormone levels follow. Well, what's DHEA comprised of? Vitamin D3. That's as far as you get into the soil. And vitamin D3 is the single most important nutrient in the human body. It's the only vitamin that a human being makes on our own. There are hundreds of vitamins in your bloodstream right now. You are only capable of making one, and it's vitamin D3. We make it from sunlight and cholesterol. The truth is, most of us are not getting enough sun. It's not that we're getting too much sun. We're actually not getting enough. So as I deplete vitamin D3, I deplete DHEA. As I deplete DHEA, my hormones follow. As my hormones go down, the pressure on the bone marrow drops. As the pressure on the bone marrow drops, my red blood cell and hemoglobin levels fall. As red blood cell and hemoglobin fall, my oxygen falls. As oxygen falls, I lose energy. So
all related.
It's all related. It's what we call the biometric chain. And it's relatively simple in a lot of cases to fix this. I mean, Dr. Sarda, who's our clinical director, I would say 70% of her hormone therapy patients are not even on hormones. They're on the raw material to make hormones.
Wow.
D3s, DHEAs. Give the body the raw material and get out of its way.
Well, that's the good news. You can fix it, right?
Yes.
This is amazing.
So good.
loved all of these tips. It's awesome stuff. And I think as we get close to wrapping up, if you're good for it, I actually run a health and fitness podcast separate from this one called Live Fit Ignite Change. And on that, we actually always close with 5 questions. It's 5 to thrive. And I feel like you are so aligned with all the stuff on that podcast that I thought it'd be appropriate to ask them here as well. So if you're up for it,
let's
go for it. All right. So these are rapid fire questions. So first thing that comes to mind, first off, number 1, what is your morning routine?
Breath work, cold shower, and weight-bearing exercise.
Awesome. So we believe in continuous learning and igniting the change that you want to see. And so what is one book, podcast, or movie that you would recommend most above all else?
Boundless by Ben Greenfield.
That is a great one. I love it personally. All right. If you feel stuck or down, what do you do to make that change rapidly?
The fastest way to change your state is to move. Movement. Even as simple as a light walk. But you know what? I'll give you another quick tip. I call it snacking on exercise, right? We always think that, I don't have 45 minutes to go to the gym. I don't have 60 minutes. I don't have 90 minutes to go to the gym. You can always snack on exercise. When I take an international flight, for example, I set my timer to go off every 60 minutes. And I go into the bathroom, as embarrassing as it is, and I go in there and I do 10 air squats and 10 deep breaths. Now, God only knows what the passenger think I'm doing in the bathroom, right? But because I'm in there, but snack on exercise is one of the greatest tips. If you stand up from your desk and you're feeling a little tired, you do 10 air squats and 10 deep breaths and sit back down, or you do 10 push-ups, or you just do 10 round the world touches. By the end of the day, the amount that has stacked up in terms of the volume of what you've done on a 10-hour flight, I'll do 250 air squats and 250 deep breaths. And I'm only getting out of my seat once an hour.
That is awesome. I love that. Snack on exercise. Great tip. All right. Number 4, let's go back in time. Your 20-year-old self, you just received funding to create a major project that will impact the world. It can be anything at all that you want it to be, as long as it impacts the world. What advice do you give to your 20-year-old self to implement that project?
I would start an educational project for basic nutrition. I don't think that schools and grade schools and even kindergartens have any inkling on how important nutrition is for children, their behavior, their attention span, their ability to concentrate, focus, and complete assignments, their impulses. And we talk about behavioral disorders, but we don't talk about nutritional disorders. And so I would very likely like to make a bigger impact on starting earlier with children's education and nutrition.
So true. So needed. All right. Now we're number 5, last one. Now we're going to the future. You have one piece of advice the world is going to remember you for above all else. What is that one piece of advice you want to be remembered for?
The frequency of authenticity is the most powerful frequency to leave a human being's body. It is the most impactful frequency that you can give to your surrounding environment. It's also the most attractive frequency in the universe. If you believe in the law of attraction, then you need to understand how to get into an authentic state. Authenticity only exists in one place, when your words are truthful and you believe what you're saying. So be cautious what you say and believe in what you say.
Wow. Love that. Outstanding. So many incredible tips, words of wisdom here. I can't thank you enough. And I can't say how much I'm looking forward to seeing you again at our wellbeing event in Puerto Rico in November. And this has just been awesome. The amount that you shared for our listeners.
I'm all fired up, dude. I got energy from this podcast. Like, I don't even want to sit down anymore.
That's awesome. And we'll link all these tips in the show notes so you can learn more about Gary, find out where the test is. Anything that I missed that I should have asked that you would like to leave the listeners with, or anywhere else they should go to be able to find more about you?
Well, you can go to my Instagram. I usually do nothing but teach on Instagram. It's at Gary Brecka. GaryBrecka. You can get that test. You can link up with me. You can get a private consult with me, or you can just go and look at the reels. And I go into a lot more detail than we did on this podcast for each of the subjects that we touched. I believe that education is not something that we own. It's education is something that flows through us. So I try as much as possible to be free with that information. As I learn and educate myself, I try to learn and educate the environment around me. So there's a lot of good information you can find there.
Awesome. We'll check it out, put it in show notes, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. And I guess before we go, I just want to acknowledge you too for what you're doing. I mean, this whole idea of helping people live with vitality, to get to peak performance, to do the things that they can. It's within our body. We just need to take it and make that difference. And you're doing that. So I thank you for that, and keep doing that. Keep making a difference. And I can't wait to see where it goes. And again, can't wait to see you in November. So thank you so much.
Patrick. Thank you so much, man. I really enjoyed this.
Awesome.
See you then.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. And again, all the show notes, resources, and transcript will be at livefitignitechange.com/Gary.
If you resonated with this and would like to live fit and ignite change in your life, you can get started for free at livefitignitechange.com/start, where you can join our community of high performers and get access to our Kickstart resources for free. You can choose if you'd like to start on the path to getting in the best shape of your life and or ignite the change you'd wish to see by casting a vision and taking the steps to get there. You can get plugged in at livefitignitechange.com/start, or for short, livefic.com/start. Also, my family and I, we're igniting the change that we wish to see in the world by helping others live fit. We were sick of all the processed, sugar-loaded foods and drinks marketed to us, especially to our youth. So we're developing a line of truly delicious, grain-free, sugar-free products that children and adults love as part of our InRive Performance Nutrition brand. Learn more and join the InRive Insiders for free to be the first to hear about samples, launch parties, and specials at inrive.com. That's INRIVE.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please be sure to like, share, rate, and review this show. This is what's needed to help reach more and serve more, so together we truly can ignite the change that we wish to see. Thank you so much for your help in making it happen, and I hope you make it an outstanding day and go forth to light, love, and serve the world and live the life you've always wanted.